I mean, obviously, with Tim Buckley's original, it was a well-known song, but I think what Ivo did in bringing it out through this Mortal Coils version was to really put it on another level altogether.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know, the implications over the years for what happened with that song were quite extraordinary. And it's a song that Brendan has taken on in recent years and made his own, and not made his own in the sense of taking it away from what it was before, but made a new area of that song for himself, and has given some incredibly moving performances of it.
Yeah.
So it's really, it really started a whole chain reaction of things.
Yeah, I wonder how, from Ivo point of view, from a managerial point of view, how you manage. I mean, there were a lot of great bands, some more successful than others. Some he could have made more money than others, promoting, spending more energy and time on this versus that. And how, because with a hit like that, right? It's, management will say, well, forget about the other bands. We are not going to record the investment. They are okay, but not that great versus, the Cocktail Twin guys, and they have success. Everybody's going crazy about the track. What's your take on that? I mean,
Ivo will freely admit that he was completely winging it. He really didn't have he wasn't a business person. He was just a guy who, started this label with no idea where it was going to go. And it was just a vehicle through which he could sign artists that he loved and try and give an outlet to them. So there was no plan to it, and it developed in a very kind of random way, and completely took on its own life force, which had both good and bad implications and outcomes to it. So, I mean, to name two perhaps extremes of things that happened with 4AD during those heady days of the 80s. It was, first of all, when Ivo was introduced by Peter Murphy of Bauhaus to the Bulgarian Voices, and just through a sort of second or third generation cassette tape, he was really struck with the quality of the voices and the singing and the arrangements, and went and tracked down the guy who'd done the original field recordings, Marcel Cellier, who'd made those recordings back in the mid-70s, and organized with him a deal to be able to release that first album that 4AD did of the Mystère des Voix Bulgares, if that's the right pronunciation, in, I think, 86. And that was huge. That brought those incredible voices to a whole new, much bigger audience. And within months of that coming out, the group was performing at the Royal Festival Hall in London and started touring in Europe. And obviously, it's well documented that it had a very profound effect on Lisa and the way she approached her singing. And she ended up, all those years later, actually performing with them.
That's right, yeah.
So that was a generally totally positive experience, and a lot of good and great stuff came out of that, both for the Bulgarian group themselves and for the listening public and people who are like Lisa, who were influenced by them. And then perhaps at the other extreme of the spectrum, you might think of the Pump Up the Volume single that came out from Mars, which was a collaboration between the guys in Colorbox and the guys in Arcane, who were both on 4AD at the time. And the success of that took everyone completely by surprise. The fact that it went to #1 all over the world and became this massive hit single, and set off a whole chain reaction of legal disputes and injunctions being thrown about, and the 4AD suddenly being swamped with money, which everyone thinks, oh well, surely that's not a problem. But if you're just any kind of small business, and you suddenly get a huge influx of money, that is actually a problem, because just if you know anything about running businesses, managing cash flow and dealing with all the income tax or corporation tax implications and blah blah blah, it creates a problem if it happens so suddenly like that. But also just all the practicalities of trying to keep up with the order flow. I mean, this thing was selling in droves, and the manufacturer, 4AD just used a relatively small manufacturing plant, which was now having to run 24/7 just to purely pump up the volume and nothing else, for weeks on end, just to try and keep up with the demand. It was an extraordinary, it was an extraordinary time, and I think in many respects, it also caused everyone who'd been involved in it to fall out with each other because of the stresses and strains of it all. So I think in the end, it became, although it was probably the most successful record commercially that 4AD ever did, it was probably the one that everyone who was involved wished had never happened, in many respects. So it was they were crazy times. It was a very small operation. I mean, 4AD operated from one or two little office rooms in this place down in Wandsworth, and it was a small operation. It was all very personal, and it was never really meant to be a major label or anything bigger than just something, a personal project.
Yeah, and 4AD still exists, right? Of course, IVO move on, and the next generation, but as a record label, still exists. I don't know how successful they are, but
I think they are successful, and they've had some big artists on the label. They had I don't know whether she's still on there, but they had Grimes on 4AD at one time. I think the National's still on 4AD. Obviously very big internationally. An album that I absolutely loved that came out on 4AD and was Mark Lanigan's Blues Funeral album. And I hadn't even realized it was on 4AD, and I absolutely adore that album. I thought it was fantastic, and his passing recently was very sad.
Absolutely.
So yes, it's still going, and I think still going fairly strongly. They've got the New Zealand artist Aldous Harding on the label, who I think is.
I need to check it out as well. I buy so much stuff, and I for everywhere. Sometimes I don't even look at the record label. And now when I begin doing the radio podcast and the YouTube podcast, I get, not weekly, but every month I get a box for a different record label. I got 2 boxes the other day, like 40 CDs. And I don't know what I'm going to do with everything, because I have a full-time job, a day job. I teach as well, and the music, and so I need another 3 lives to consume everything, man.
So I think 4AD is still quite eclectic, but it's somebody else's vision these days. It's a completely different beast to what it was under IVO.
Yeah, I wrote myself a note to check it out later on. That Condense, it was. Well, I'm not saying anything new, but it was a different concept. By that, I mean, the music was different. The picture on every record was different. The title of every album was different. Long name from songs. It's not that the typical, well, I went out with Mary and we fall in love, or, there was a lot of thought put into that, Brendan and
Yeah, there was,
yeah,
so, just the sheer fact of having both Brendan and Lisa as creative forces in that band immediately took it in two completely different directions, because Brendan's songs that he sings on and he writes the lyrics for are obviously very, very different in nature to Lisa's songs that have a totally different dynamic and have the wordless language that she sings in. So immediately you got those two completely different feels. And then, as we were discussing before, there was Brendan's approach to songwriting, which is looking to make every individual song have a completely different feel basis to it. And then there was the fact that, even when I first met them, they were always looking to do something different with the basic range of instruments we had. Always looking to use instruments in some kind of different way, push boundaries. And we also obviously had Lisa's hammered dulcimer, the Yang Chin, in the mix, which gave us that element that other bands typically didn't have at that time. But then as soon as we started to get a little bit of income coming in, and it coincided with the time that music technology was moving forwards, and you were starting to get these keyboards with sampled sounds that enabled you to access the sounds of an orchestra or different instruments that it was beyond our possibility to use, just because we couldn't afford to bring in classical instrument players or go and record with an orchestra. It wasn't Brendan in particular was already heavily influenced by orchestral arrangements and was keen on getting into that, but the arrival of this kind of equipment actually gave him the possibility to start writing in parts for trumpets and cellos and trombones and things into his musical arrangements, which it was then practical for us to, when it came to record the Spleen and Ideal album, we were at a stage where, at that point, where it was possible to, as long as the stuff was already written and we knew what the performers' parts were to play, he could bring in a couple of violinists, a cellist, a trombonist, whatever, to perform those parts and immediately expand the range. So that the difference between the kind of thing, the setup we were working with and the kind of things we were writing on the first album and the EP to Spleen and Ideal, which became the second album, was enormous because of that sea change that had happened with the scope that Brendan had for writing and arranging. And it also gave Lisa the opportunity to expand in the dimensions that she was singing in, because these were now, Lisa always had a great love of opera. So these kind of more orchestral arrangements rather than drum, bass, guitar arrangements gave a lot more space for her to develop into with her voice. And so suddenly they were, both writing and developing music in a very different way. And I suddenly found myself playing timpani drums instead of a drum kit, and
that's right, yeah,
things. And we evolved, and so immediately the sound had changed. And then as we progressed, by the time we got on to a couple of albums further down the line, we'd started listening to a lot of early music, so things like the hurdy-gurdy and the shawm type chanters were coming into the mix, and there was with just general exposure to a lot more world music influences and instruments, we were gathering instruments as we went along and exploring different sounds. And it just created this roller coaster of different areas that we could expand into. And it meant that every time we sat down to write another song, it was something different again. It was a different palette, and a different approach. So it was great, but it always had because Brendan and Lisa were always controlling it. It always had those elements to it that were creating a cohesion between all the different periods that we went through, and it worked. It wasn't like just a compilation of completely different random things. It had that thread running all the way through it. So it always made it very interesting and constantly in development.
Absolutely. As I was preparing questions for you and preparing the interview in the week, I listened to all the vinyls and CDs and Spotify as well, all the places I go, but I own a lot of the music. And I kind of see the progression over time from album 1, 2, and 3. And at least from the first album, I think, some edition include the Dead Can Dance album, but the EP, The Garden of the Arcane Delights.
Yeah, so that was that's right. Initially they were released separately. But then later on there was a CD that combined the two. Yeah.
Right. And then there's a particular track that I really like. It's called, then again, it's Dead Can Dance. So the names are different. The names are long. In power we entrust, the love advocated.
Yeah.
It's a long name.
That always made me laugh, because from the point of view that when we after we'd done the first album, Ivo was very keen that we should do a single, so that we could try and have something to go for the singles charts as well as the album charts. Because it wasn't just wanting to be commercial, but he just thought that would help to expand our audience and give us more chance of getting something played on the radio stations. But Brendan and Lisa were both a bit not out and out against it, but they just didn't like they just always felt that with a single, it's very much you write a song, and it's there for 5 minutes and then it's gone and forgotten about. That's the way singles tended to be marketed, and it gave people to think about them in that way. And they didn't like the idea of writing a song that would just be disposable. So they weren't really into the idea of us doing a single. So the compromise was that we would do this 4-track EP, which would qualify for the singles charts, but we wouldn't name any individual track on the album as the A-side or the lead single. So it would be up to any given DJ to decide, if they were going to play a track on the radio, which track they would play. So we came up with the 4 songs, and the one that you just mentioned was not by our design, but it just turned out that way. It was outstandingly, obviously, the most commercial track. So it was immediately obvious, if you listened to the 4 songs, that this would be the one that probably 99% of DJs would pick and play.
Correct. Yeah.
So I've never got him to admit this, but my theory is that Brendan then decided to give it a title that a DJ would find very, very much of a mouthful. Yeah. So it wouldn't. So from that point of view, it might make them stop and think about using that track in preference to one of the others. So the song got called "In Power We Entrust, the Love Advocated," which is not the sort of thing you can see popping up at #1 on the hit parade.
That's right.
And I don't know. He would probably deny that was anywhere in his thinking, but I'm not so sure.
I think, and then again, I have not talked to Brenda. I don't know Brenda, but very likely that your assessment is correct, right? So yeah, we are in the business where we need to put a single for the radio. Yeah, we are in a contract to do it. We'll do it, but we are smart, and then we'll make it difficult for a DJ to pronounce and then play that, right? So
if you interview him, you can put him on the spot and ask him.
Oh, I will. I will. Then we go to the second album, obviously, the Spleen and Ideal. Yeah. I see that it's very different from a consumer point of view, right? Yeah. Listen, as I say, I listened to all the stuff again this week, and it's very different than the second album. More transition from post-punk to kind of gothic rock and neoclassical dark wave, if you will. And then another track that I really like, We Are Name Again, De Profundis, Out of the Depth of Sorrow. It reminds me a lot of, I don't know if you know a German band called Popelvuh.
Yeah.
They did a lot of work for all the Werner Herzog movies.
No, in fact, Brendan introduced me to them. They were a big influence on Brendan. He loved their music. Yeah, it's
unbelievable, the music. Right? What do you remember? What do you recall about that? In some records, kind of weird. Some record you were participant, right? Because you were doing other stuff for that. And then, although you were not in some album, you were not playing drums, but you were in the band, right? So.
Yeah, so really between the first album or the Garden of Delights EP and the Spleen and Ideal album, the whole nature of the way Dead Can Dance operated changed, and it was really to do with the coming in of the new instruments that gave Brendan the possibility to start doing these orchestral compositions. So he was now. Whereas we'd previously been writing all the songs in rehearsal, albeit that Brendan was really directing most of the music and pretty much setting what he wanted from the drum parts and the bass parts that me and the bassist were playing. By now, he was really working much more on his own, just at home with equipment, with keyboards that had the sounds in, with drum machines, and he was writing much more on his own. So he would come to me and say, "I've written this drum part on the drum machine. Can you play this?" And I would take it away to my place, and I'm trying to work out all this syncopation, make my limbs do things that they never dreamed of doing to reproduce these complicated things that he'd created on a drum machine. Which was tremendously good practice for me and developed my drumming abilities leaps and bounds. But it meant that we weren't working together on things as a band in the writing stages. So it didn't really change things that much, because he and Lisa always wrote 99% of everything anyway, but it just really changed the way that we were working on a day-to-day basis. So he was creating these things with a very different feel to them, and now starting to bring in, some of the pieces still had a drum pattern to them that would be played on a conventional drum kit, whereas others didn't feature a drum kit at all. They would have timpani drums or even just very spacious incidental percussion, or no percussion at all. And some tracks had bass guitar and some didn't. But there was a lot of classical instrumentation being brought in, and a classical approach to instrumentation. He was also very influenced by, as Popelvuh that you mentioned, was certainly an influence, but he was also, sorry, I've got a tickle in the throat. Not used to talking for this long.
No, that's right.
Yeah, he was also very influenced by film composers like Nino Rota, and John Barry, that kind of thing with big orchestral arrangements. So he was going very much down that route, and writing incredible stuff that I was going around and hearing, and wow, yes, it's amazing. So when we came to record that, we initially took all my drums up to the studio in the Midlands where we were booked in to record. But Brendan took me aside and said to me, look, I've written most of this stuff with drum machines. We're going to waste a lot of time trying to set up all the drums and everything and do it. How do you feel about me, recording it with the machines? And I said, yeah, whatever. It's not an issue for me. I don't want to see you go through what you went through with the previous album. So give yourself as much time as possible for the production side of things, and crack on, do it how you want to do it. So yeah, it was kind of strange. It wasn't something that premeditated, but we ended up. So I was there for the first part of the recording sessions, but didn't actually participate in the recording for that album at all. But then, of course, when we went out to perform it live, Brendan never wanted to use machines and any further or any sound electronic sounds any further than he really had to on stage. He always wanted it to be as live and dynamic as possible. So so I was then learning and playing the parts, and we were touring with not only the drum kit but also a percussion kit and the timps and everything. So it became suddenly a huge logistics exercise to take anything out on tour. And we had the first tour we did after the Spleen and Ideal album. We had, I think, 2 cellists, a 3-piece brass section, and the band. So we were suddenly a mini orchestra on tour. So yeah, it was a very dramatic change. But it was never, for me personally, it was never an issue, because I was still involved. I loved being involved. I loved the music that they were making, and I was just happy to have any part in it. So I still love doing the live work. And but yeah, curiously, when the album came out, I was almost listening to it like a fan who was hearing it for the first time.
Yeah, and you mentioned logistics is so difficult to put a tour together. I mean, even never mind a U2 tour or the Genesis tour, right? But something like 10 gigs in, I don't know, 15 or 10 different cities on 3 different countries. It's very difficult to arrangement and then set up dates and then move the equipment and then rent a band. You don't have roadies all the time. You guys would do everything, find a hotel, and maybe the hotel is booked and you need to sleep in a crampy place. And I mean, I take for granted, I go to see a show tonight or tomorrow, I pay whatever X number of dollars, I drink a cup of beer, I go home, I go to work. I have no idea how the equipment got there, if there was a sound check, if the band had an argument on the way there, if or
of course,
or if they have a bad night's sleep, or they're running low on funds to go to the next gig. No idea. I pay a fee and I enjoy it. So for Europe, it's very difficult to, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is a huge logistical exercise, even for relatively small tours and bands. Yeah, there are, as you say, all those elements to it, and even though you may only be on stage for an hour and a half, 2 hours for a performance, when you're actually out on tour, it just consumes your whole time. So during the days when I was touring with the band, I've got lists of towns and cities across Europe and the States and that I've been to, but it's almost like I haven't been to them because I can't remember anything about them. All I ever saw was the inside of buses, the inside of venues because Dead Can Dance sound checks used to last for hours. We used to, Brendan was always completely fanatical about about getting the sound as good as possible. So we were always, we could be at a venue at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning and be sound checking all the way through until the doors open at 7 o'clock in the evening. Just working on getting everything. He's absolutely fanatical, Brendan, about making the sound of everything he does as best as it can possibly be. And I think that's something that audiences really appreciate. I think Dead Can Dance audiences really respond to the lengths that have been gone to try and make that sound that then envelops them and gives them that really passionate response. But it's hard work and it's bloody exhausting. You really. We never used to do, like when you hear of the heavy metal bands who are out on tour for 2 years at a time and play, so many 100 gigs in that time. We never did anything like that. We only ever went out for 2 or 3 months at a time and, maybe did 15 shows or whatever. They've been doing slightly longer tours in more recent years, but But even then, we would come back from those tours absolutely exhausted because we'd just to put that number of shows on. We'd been flat out the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially if you are just recently getting married or forming a family or living with someone or whatever the situation, having kids, and it's very difficult to disappear for your companion, lover, friend, wife, 3 months at a time, even never mind during a year, So.
Yeah, as you know from the book, that's exactly what happened to me. I got to the stage where in the early 90s, we had my wife and I had our second daughter on the way, and my wife was, had a very demanding job in teaching, which was really the mainstay of our income as a family. So that had to come first, and it just got to the point where I couldn't say to her, I'm going off and leaving you with the 2 kids and your job to do for 3 months while I go swanning around playing a few gigs. So at that point I had to say to Brendan and Lisa, look, I'm really sorry, but I can't do it anymore. And they were fine about it, and I don't think it had any detrimental. Well, I know it didn't have any negative effect on anything that came after. They were, if they hadn't already been by that stage, they were completely writing everything by themselves, and really there was nothing. I was a part of what they were doing because we were good friends and had worked together for many years, and I was in in the setup on that basis, but really in terms of just playing parts, they could it wasn't difficult for them to replace what I'd been the parts that I'd been doing. So so I didn't really create any hiccups for the band going forwards. But then what I call in my book, this section of the book that I describe as the parallel adventures began, because then I obviously was still, a huge fan of Dead Can Dance and wanted to continue following everything that they were doing and going to shows whenever I could and having any little involvement that I could do. But at the same time, again, it turned out that Brendan created the opportunity for me to make my first solo album and set me off on that path. So I ended up having ever since I've had my own kind of music career that I've been able to work around my family life and other work commitments and so on going on in my world, and they've been on a different stratosphere doing what they do. And it made a kind of probably something that's a little bit different in a music memoir, that I was able to follow those two different paths on very different levels.
Mm.
And in my world, there were a lot of the struggles of being effectively a new artist again, and trying to make my headway in difficult commercial environment and achieve sales, and the problems of not being able to do as much anywhere near as much live work as I would have done over the years, just simply for cost reasons and
Sure,
practical reasons.
Peter,
But also
what do you,
enjoying the huge success that they continued to have, which was brilliant.
plus you needed to, be a family man and help your wife and your kids. That's important things as well. So it's, of course, something you need to pay the bills. So, what do you think? You think it's good to take a break and then we continue? We've been talking for 2 hours and continue.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly that time goes.
Yeah, we kind of know that. So I'm very grateful that we can make it part 2 or part 3, whatever. And then we need to talk about your life after all the records that I have, and I know your stuff, the work that you have done, and the influence that Lisa and then Brendan had on you, because those 3 years give you a lot of confidence to now, hey, I can put a record on my own. I know some of the record label. I will call Johnny at that, or Peter, Mary at that record label. Hey, I'm willing to finance, and then coming to the United States, and so it's a lot to cover. And if you don't mind, I wanna share something here some pictures that I took from the album so people see it. Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the cover, and
well, that's the cover and the little flap that goes inside the front of the book, because it's a hardback book, so it's got a paper cover there.
Correct. And I will show like 5 pictures, and of course has with forward for Lisa. Let me see, right there, right? Very well written what she wrote there. So
yeah, it's lovely. It's not the sort of standard forward that you tend to get in books. It's very, very Lisa. Yeah. I really appreciated her contributing that to it. It's lovely.
Yeah, and I think I have 3 pictures to show, and then we're done. I think that's the one that I took from the book, of course, obviously.
Yeah, so this is very early. This is early 1983, one of our earliest rehearsals before we before we did the first gig with Ivo put us into, and so obviously before we did got into the recording studio, and that's obviously Lisa on the left. That's our original bassist, Paul, just in the background behind her, me on the drums, and a very lean and hungry Brendan on guitar.
Yeah, he was very skinny there. Do you remember, if you close your eyes for a minute, do you remember that day or that week? Or
not specifically. I mean, we had many rehearsals that were like
that, right? So that was one of many, right?
I can remember that era of the rehearsals. It was a very strange. I mean, the hall that we're in there, it was on. I think a lot of people who know about the early days know that where we lived at the time was this council, local authority housing estate, very run down in the East End of London. They were classified as difficult to let flats. It was very. It was where people with very little money lived, and it was quite a rough area. And this community hall was kind of sat in the middle between the tower blocks that Brendan and Lisa and Paul lived in, and where me and Nikki lived. And it was just a rectangular box built in the 1960s, just prefabs. And it had this, you can just see in the top there, it's got this wood ceiling with these very bright neon lights, strip lights set into it. But then really bizarrely, somebody had come behind Brendan. You can see somebody had built this, which wasn't a part of the original building. Somebody decided it would be a good idea to build this kind of country style brick and wood fireplace.
Correct, yeah.
Which I don't think could be used. I can't imagine. I think it would have breached all sorts of fire and health and safety regulations. But it was just there, and it was completely incongruous. It was totally out of character with this 1960s bland rectangular hall. and it had all these, because as I say, it was quite a tough area. It had all these metal grills on the windows, these anti-vandal grills on the outside of the windows. So when Paul had his bass guitar cranked up and was hitting those notes that really get you in the diaphragm, then all these windows were buzzing away in the background as well. And we used to have that in the background of some of our demo recordings that we probably sent to 4AD. It probably got the buzzing window grills in the background.
That's right.
So it was really, it was and you can see behind me as well, there's some upturned tables which they used to use, pull out and use when the hall was in use for the bingo night, which they had a couple of nights a week. So it was they were funny days, you know. They were a real mix of emotions. But this incredible music came out of this, this environment.
Oh, absolutely.
In every way, holding against it.
Brendan looked very, very skinny guy, right? Yeah.
He was. Yeah. Well, we didn't know where our next meal was coming in from in those days.
Wow.
It wasn't so bad for me because Nikki was earning a bit of money, and we weren't quite so bad. But Brendan, Lisa, and Paul were all living on just on government handout money, and it was a hard life.
Yeah. I want to show another. That's another picture as well.
Yeah. So that was taken during the same rehearsal. So it's the same place. You can see the beautiful fireplace from a different angle.
And the last one, it's a beautiful place then.
Yeah, so this is that was the thing. This is actually in the same. This is in Brendan and Lisa's flat, which was in this same housing estate. Yeah. Well, this was the thing about it. The actual view from the windows of these flats was straight onto the River Thames and over the London skyline. So the views from the flats were really spectacular. And to some extent, that's what made it living in that location. Gave it some pleasant aspect to it, and also was to some extent quite inspirational as well. Having that space and the water to look out over, I think that helped a lot in our psyche all the time, and helped it not to be too depressing.
Absolutely. Let me stop sharing now, and then feel free to mention the book again, Peter, where people can buy it, and I know this in Amazon, but there's places all over the world that you can buy it.
Yeah, thankfully, my publishers, West Red Hen Press, who are in Pasadena, California. Yeah, they're a really great little publishing company that I thoroughly recommend people to check out. They publish, I think it's about 25 or so books a year. And they've been brilliant with the book. The reason why I put it with them was because the two people who run the company, Kate and Mark, they set the press up in the early 90s. I think 1994 it was launched, and they were huge fans of all the 4AD artists, so including Dead Kandala. And when I approached them initially, they were really excited about the book, and just gave me the response, made me feel like, I really want to work with these people. Yep. And then as a company, their staff have really taken it on board and been really excited and enthusiastic about it. They're obviously involved in designing the cover, which I'm very happy with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And distribution-wise, in between the time that I signed up with them and the time that the book was published, they changed their distribution arrangements and got in contract with a company an operation called Ingram, which is one of the biggest fulfillment companies in the world for the publishing industry. So consequently, the distribution that they've got on this book now is absolutely fantastic. And if I Google the title of the book, it comes up on sale in places in Denmark, in Hungary, in Taiwan, Japan, Australia, Brazil, probably in your country as well, or your country of origin. it's amazing. It's incredible. So that is both online retailers and bricks and mortar stores. So I think generally the answer is you should be able to, if anybody would like to buy it, thank you very much. You shouldn't have any trouble getting it. You should be able to find it in stock or order it through your local bookseller or music seller, or you should find it easily online.
Absolutely. It was very pleased if the people that are going to be listening this interview, the radio, YouTube channel, the Facebook, and Lisa Gerrard fans, Peter Ulrich fans, Brendan, and we mentioned Cocktail Tweet many times here as well. Whatever listen, get the book. It's a great book, easy read with a lot of picture, with a lot of funny anecdotes as well. And it was very nice talking to you, Peter. I will send you a link. We'll make arrangement. And before I forget, what I'm going to do, I want to raffle. We'll do like a real raffle, and we'll get couple, 2 or 3 books from you. We'll get it autographed by you, and then we'll send it to some of the people from Facebook or YouTube channel.
Yeah, sure, we can do that. Yeah,
we can arrange it. We'll work out the detail. It was very nice talking to you, Peter. Good luck with everything, man. And it was very nice.
I look forward to part 2.
Of course, we'll do part 2 and 3 now. Now, United States watches, so we need to watch some FIFA World Cup soccer, man. Yeah. Are you what fan of are you? Who Brendan like Arsenal, right? Or no? You
in the domestic league here, yeah. Brendan's Arsenal. I'm a fanatical supporter of a team called Norwich City, who are the we're famous for being what they call here the ultimate yo-yo side, because we're never quite good enough to stay in the Premier League, but we're often a bit too good for the Championship. So we just go up and down, backwards and forwards between the two leagues.
I like, of course, Manchester City, because a guy from my country used to be the coach, Manuel Pellegrini, like 5 years ago. He was an unbelievable coach. And in Arsenal, Alexis Sanchez played with Arsenal like 3 years, like 5 years, 6 years ago. He was an unbelievable striker. So
terrific.
It was very nice talking to you, and have a great afternoon there, Peter. Appreciate it. Thank you.